Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Sandra Giedeman and Irina Mashinski. Sandra will read first, and then Irina. Sandra Giedeman was born in St. Louis, Missouri. She moved to Southern California with her husband and lives in San Clemente. She worked as an editor for many years and is past president of the Orange County chapter of Penn. Her poetry collection in this hour from Green Terra Press is available on Amazon. Sandra was awarded the Mudfish Poetry Prize by Charles Simic, and her work has been published in England, France, Italy, and many journals, including Cortland Review Poetry, Entropy, Paris/Atlantic, Bellevue Literary Review /NYU, and Fiera Lingua Italy. She has one Pushcart nomination. Here's a splendid poet, Sandra Giedeman.
Thank you, Harry. I'd like to start with some poems about my hometown, Southern Illinois, on the banks of the Mississippi. I like to write about place and family. So I'll start with Peacock Alley. On a back street in St. Louis, near the banks of the Mississippi, where the Admiral paddle wheeler cruised the muddy water on summer nights, Peacock Alley in Gaslight Square. The laughing boy and I loved jazz and being the only white kids at the hidden club where we listened to Miles Davis play All of You and learned something about music, about grace and heartbreak. I sat with the laughing boy, drank rum and Coke. He was one of those who peak early, collar turned up, hair slicked. He wore pegged pants and a faded jacket, smoked Camels and squinted through clouds of smoke. The charm later turned to a pot belly, I heard. But God, that night, that smile, all gums and eagle. Next, 4th of July, 1950. I'm 6, holding a burnt sparkler. My sister makes crazy eights until hers dies too. Wilson Park, weeping willows, time to go home. Smell of gunpowder lingering from fireworks. It is dark walking through the trees. Father says the night landscape reminds him of France, a World War II battle when he was an infantry foot soldier. 2 of my brothers are not yet born and now long dead. That night stuck like no others. Was it the shadowy trees, the smell of black powder that triggered Father's memories? I remember the now spent wand of ashes, delicate as smoke, toppling into nothing, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the blue chlorine smell of the night swimming pool, that Midwest summer of heat waves and polio, cherry bombs and firecrackers. Spring at the Coronado Hotel. We watched the gardener arc a hose, carelessly washing away the work of mud sparrows, hornets, and wasps, nests studded with eggs in the intricate catacombs they constructed under the eaves of the hotel. A single red flower sways near our table. My mother planted a crooked row of tulips that color in the corner of our house to the street when we all still spoke to one another, when we thought death happened to old people, not to our brother, the beautiful boy with strawberry blonde hair and deep voice who cried easily, delicate collarbones, alabaster freckled skin. My husband and I eat a bright salad under an umbrella. A hummingbird is close. I hear the whir of his wings as he dives, then hovers over my head. Birdwatcher. A poem should have birds. All of them are mimics, opera singers, warriors, pure spirit. From my deck, I see a dove pace circles around a pit bull that ignores its croon of despair. Atop a phone pole, a mockingbird pleads for a mate at 3 a.m., awakening some of us who hear his deep-throated yearning and understand. I've seen an egret with a question mark of a neck posed against a muddy wall of the LA River while cars rushed by on the Golden State Freeway. I felt lonely when I watched a trio of hunched-shouldered cormorants congregate on the Redondo Pier, reminding me of my long-dead uncles talking baseball. Have you ever seen a flying wedge of pelicans float above the coast highway, borne on air? The sky is theirs. They own it as much as the acrobat red-tailed hawk artfully dodging angry crows above the downtown interchange, while miles away, hummingbirds in Hancock Park wage war over red nectar in the feeder my friend hangs from an oak. Last Sunday, a wary-eyed seagull, ignored by everyone and big as a cat, paced the hotel's cafe patio, hoping for careless crumbs, darting expertly to peck at the dropped remains of a croissant. Dusk, or as Thelonious called it, crepuscule, the sky shading into lavender, is approaching as I sit with bird book and calendar. I know that's why the blackbirds squawk, aware as they are of the dying of the light. I also like to write about San Clemente, where I live. It's beautiful. I love San Clemente. I call this one fugitive sleep. From my window, I look down to El Camino Real, where the Casablanca Motel sign blinks green to an empty street. Dim headlights move north on the coast road. Harbor lights shimmer and moonlight slivers the waves at North Beach, where a fire ring still burns. A mother raccoon moves along the fence top outside with her babies. Their shadow through the window startles me. There's a ticking click and creak of things not heard in daylight. A black and white movie flickers on the TV. A last dying gleam of a gutted candle and a dog that pads behind me through the dark house. My husband snoring a low rhythmic hum. I lie awake near the bedside clock, steadily pulsing time in red, 1:45 a.m. Excuse me. Midnight in San Clemente. A long freight train wends through town on tracks at the water's edge, whistle blowing. I could be anywhere else, a brick railroad flat in a steel mill town, a riverboat on the brown Mississippi, a lonely farm in the Ozark Hollows, or that last small Midwestern apartment, his last, where my father sat alone, tobacco-stained and gray. I know that whistle, plaintive, pervasive, blowing across the land. I also like to write about Mexico, so here's one. Bufadora. I wanted to buy the papier-mâché devil in a red chair that day, remember? Hand-painted pink skin and rouged cheeks, tiny horns poking through shiny black hair. I liked that. Satan in an armchair, and the mud fetish doll with the crown of thorns and tiny nails encircling the head. You chose a skeleton in a sombrero at a stand festooned with blue piñatas near the Bufadora, handed it to me. We saw dolphins and drank Coronas, talked about nothing on this stray weekend, probably our last together, as we watched a rat dart across the patio at the restaurant on the beach, thick with tangled bougainvillea, dripping purple against the stucco, where bats buzzed in flurries of black, dodging the falling night. Another Mexico. Baja Beach. A steady slosh of waves render the ocean's secrets. A dead bird rocked by the waves in a last lullaby. Bits of shells floating, drifting, riding high tide. The Pacific whispers throwing weeds of seaweed. Ropes and entrails of the newly dead onto the sand. Buzzing flies hover. A lone seagull kicks among slippery vines, darts and retreats. I close my eyes and an intricate amoeba drifts into view, followed by a small creature that lazily cartwheels across my field of vision. This Mexican beach is a dark dream where midnight fireworks flare. Explosions are muffled, colors dimmed by distance. Night holds my hand, running with wounded feet toward the last vapors of the moon, leached of color, stealing its light from the sun. I watched the pale lizard of morning slither across the horizon. Here's one I wrote about the desert. I like Joshua Tree. I like the deserts here. Night drive. Bleak winds remind me that California is, after all, a desert, semi-arid. I looked out the car window, seeing the whistling wind send tumbleweeds across the road. Wind like this brought memories with it. The Santa Ana's here again. The names of the places here tell the story. Death Valley, Vernus Creek, Burnt Branch. I'm driving through the Mojave on my road trip to Utah. Roadside bushes pick up the beams of my headlights, what appears to be ghostly coyotes. I blink and see that they are just dusty millers, mesquite, greasewood, not small groups of people clustered near the road, arms upraised in prayer, but Joshua trees. In the Mojave, snakes rattle quietly as a muted tambourine before lunging. Get a grip, I told myself, noticing that my headlights skewed in different directions, one pointing up like a floodlight, the other illuminating the broken median down the middle of the road. The Santa Ana's, a bad wind whipping, lashing, drying everything to tinder for a conflagration. Orange fireballs rolling down the sides of the San Jacintos, the San Gabriels. I remember someone telling me that the indigenous tribes, the Chumash, called Los Angeles the Valley of Smoke. I drove through the night into Nevada, then southwest Utah, where the rocks turned red, adobe brick red, burnt sienna red. The wind was long gone, the sun slowly turning the night sky to pink dawn. Here's one about the hippie days, remembering that in Topanga Canyon. Topanga. Yesterday, I watched blackbirds soar over the canyon. A hawk swirled in tight circles, honing in on a hapless creature below. We sat in the garden of my old friend's house in Topanga, sipping chamomile tea. Yellow daisies, cornflowers, California poppies, oak savannas surrounded us. A dusty black dog with splayed teeth slept nearby. He's my buddy, she said, lives up the road. Every morning he comes back way through the trees to spend the day. Do any of the old gangs still live here? I asked, remembering the 60s. Not many, but we were birds of a feather then, weren't we? Her handyman Cody, 60-something, wearing cracked leather boots, ambles up. I'll finish the deck tomorrow, he said. How long have you lived here? I asked. Moved here with Neil Young in 68, followed the music, never left, he said. He gunned his dilapidated pickup and took off in a cloud of dust, an apparition from the past. Okay, excuse me. Okay. I like to write about also what happened to where I grew up. It's called the Rust Belt. Deeply affected that part of the country. Rust Belt blues. Another pickup truck morning in the sweat-dripping Illinois summer. He's leaving the night shift at the steel mill. Hank Williams on the morning AM. Burly, no-neck millwright and union steward. My father, swinging his lunch pail as a weapon. His language of blast furnace, hod carrier, slag, coke oven. His utter contempt for company men, working where his father and grandfather had. Grimy hands even pumps couldn't scrub clean. Goggles, steel-tipped work shoes. 5 children who left for the coast, leaving him in his rusty world where the mill and the Catholic Church closed. When the final mill whistle blew, he stood in the street calling out, only to hear an answering echo. And then I would like to finish with this one. This is a prose piece called A Room of Memories. I'm here for a poetry workshop with 20 other women in a historic casa with soaring ceilings and hardwood floors, windows open to Southern California ocean and beach. Explore, our teacher said. I wander through the rooms and stop at one. Mahogany glass fronted cabinets display the wealth of 19th century Californians and the treasures they brought back from their travels abroad. One case is filled with carved ivory, including a tiny pair of embroidered Chinese slippers as small as a doll's shoe. The card says the shoes were used to bind infant girls' feet. Elephant ivory, the tiny shoes. Every culture has its sad artifacts. Home from the poetry workshop, I take note of my own artifacts. The handprint of my daughter, Beth, pressed into clay and dated. Her kindergarten gift to me. A picture of her dismounting a horse at her first riding lesson. The photos she takes of hawks, ospreys, herons, and snowy egrets in the reserve near her home. My album of old pictures and fading Polaroids. Mother dressed in overalls, patriotic, working in a factory during World War II, as many women did then. When the war ended, so did her working career, and she returned to cooking, sewing, raising children. Those nuns in their stiff white wimples, black robes, rimless glasses, taught us to be future wives and mothers, although they denied those roles to themselves. Having it all wasn't spoken about by that generation. As I've grown older, my understanding of their lives has deepened. That day at the casa, wandering through rooms of memories, brought it all forward. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for your beautiful reading. You're always so, your poetry is always so precise and vivid, and it's also very comforting. And I like the way that you include your family, what you see, where you're living. When you first began to write poetry, who were some of the poets that influenced you?
Of course, Sylvia Plath, Eliot. God, I love Ted Kruser. I like his poetry. Trying to think. But those were the main ones. Sylvia Plath, I read all of her books, and I loved Eliot. Those two.
Well, your poetry is always, I don't know if I said it, very comforting too. My poetry teacher was Anne Stanford, and she grew up in La Habra, and she would write about that area. And then when she moved into LA area, she wrote about that. So I always appreciate, people writing about where they actually live, the soil over which they live. What you wrote about that first poem, I believe it was about your hometown in Southern Illinois. How old were you when you came to Southern California?
20.
20? And
20 years old. So I really have lived out here much longer than where I grew up. Yeah.
Where did you go to school out here? Did you go to college?
I actually went to Cal State Northridge.
Northridge.
Where you went. And I also took many classes at the art school downtown and at Pierce College in the Valley. So all over the place.
Were you living
in many classes at UCLA as well?
Were you living in the Valley when you went to Northridge?
Yes. In Woodland Hills, yeah.
Woodland Hills.
Yeah.
You know how hot it can be in
Yes. I remember leaving Cal State and seeing the register of the temperature, and it would be like, oh my God, over 100.
I know last year it hit 112. This year we've hit probably 104, 105. When did you move to the Laguna area?
My husband's work.
Your work?
His work.
You had a bookstore down there too for many years, correct?
We did. We had a bookstore up Church Brown.
Right.
In Laguna. It was a wonderful experience. We hosted the MFA students from UCI for their readings and many other writers. It was a wonderful experience. I had 2 women partners and we had a great time.
I think my wife, Holly Prado, read at your...
I'm sure she did every book. Yeah, it was a popular reading
great
place.
Bookstore. And were you living in Laguna at the time or in a nearby town?
Nearby town. I was living in Lake Forest, and we were hampered by all the big stores that opened, and Amazon and all the big box stores kind of hurt business for a while. But it looks like the independents are rebounding now. So,
how long was your bookstore open?
Well, for us, quite a long time. We had it for 4 years.
Now, what are you reading in poetry these days, Sandra?
Gosh, that's a hard one. I'm just reading everything I can get my hands on. Everything I read about and that they recommend, I go buy it. I'm trying to think of who I like right now. It'll come to my mind in a moment. Just drawing a blank right now. I like Mary Jo Bang. I think she's interesting. I like yeah.
Have you read any of the poets, Natalie Cruz or Ada Limon? Ada Limon is the president.
I do like her. Yes, I clipped and saved one of her poems last week. I thought it was so beautiful. I want to read it again. She's wonderful.
And I think Natalie Diaz, if that's her name. But yeah, there's so many great poets. And did you ever teach, or were you just a bookstore?
I spent most of my working career as a magazine editor, trade magazine editor. And then I did tech writing. So
and what magazine?
Pardon me?
What magazine or magazines were you the editor
They
of?
were trade magazines for various industries like security companies or, that sort of industrial type magazines.
Now, I'm 82, and as I've grown older, I don't quite have the energy as I used to. What's a day like for you in terms of writing?
I write in the morning only. I'm not so good at it in the afternoon. I kind of tire out. But morning is my best time. And it always has been, actually. I get up early and I get done what I want to get done. And then the rest of the day is errands or taking care of the house or reading, whatever.
Well, I find that out too. I find in the morning, before I turn on the TV or read newspapers or listen to people, I write just out of waking up after I have coffee and this and that. And then I find my focus is better. I'm more clear-eyed and I'm more alert. And, that's how the day affects me. I'm best in the morning.
Definitely. Same here. And then I have a couple of wonderful women that I meet with every week, and we just write together with a prompt. We have a prompt and we just write for a half an hour, whatever, and then we read it aloud to one another. I find that stimulating. I enjoy writing with other writers.
You have, two women, right? Two other
Three
women?
of us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we have a Zoom meeting every Tuesday, and we write for an hour and read to one another, and it's wonderful.
And you do the writing like within that hour?
Yes, we mute and turn off the video and then write and then turn it back on again and read to one another. And it develops a closeness.
That sounds like a great idea. And the community and the camaraderie and the mutual support, that's always a good thing.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's always wonderful to see you. You haven't been on our show for a while. Your poetry is almost like short stories sometimes. You're very Americana, whether the 4th of July, or you're talking about Joshua Tree, or you're looking at the ocean, or you're talking about the Midwest. And I always love listening to you write. I know you work hard at your poetry and your writing, but it always comes out like it's done it with such ease. So I always appreciate that right there too.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you.
Well, so thank you very much, Sandra. It's a pleasure to see you. And now we're going to introduce Irina Mashinski. Irina Mashinski was born in Moscow. She graduated from Moscow University, where she completed her PhD, Alien Geography and the Theory of Landscape. In 1991, she emigrated to the U.S., where she taught high school mathematics, as well as history and meteorology at several universities. She is the author, The Naked World, Mad Hat Press 2022, and Giornato Cervena Barbara Press 2022, and of 11 books of poetry and essays in Russian. She is co-editor with Robert Chandler and Boris Dralyak of the Penguin Book of Russian Poetry, Penguin Classics 2015. Her work has been translated into several languages and has appeared in Poetry International, World Literature Today, and elsewhere. Here's a superb poet, Irina Mashinski.
Hello. Hello. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Harry. I hope that the rain is not, you don't hear rain in the background. It's okay. And because we had a huge thunderstorm, it was the entrance, grandiose entrance of our program. I am very thankful for having me, and it's especially important because cinematography was such an important part in our youth. It was oxygen because my youth overlapped with the final years of the very stagnant Soviet Empire. So it was some oxygen. The good cinema was oxygen for us. So it's very special for me for that reason too. Today, I will read from this book that you mentioned, The Naked World. I just want to say a couple of words because it's a bit confusing. It started. It was in the making for 15 years. It started as a small collection of poetry, and then in the pandemic year, 2020, some elements of prose started to accumulate and then melted back with poems. And in 2022, it appeared. It was published by Northup Press. So I will obviously only read poems today. Some of them, just a little disclaimer, some of them are original English poems that I wrote. Some of them were rewritten by myself in English. And some were translated by close friends and collaborators, Boris Draguk, Maria Gorstein, Angela Livingston, Tony Brinkley. So I hope not to forget to mention which one is a translation, which one is not. So I'll start with the first poem that I wrote. Normally, when there are big events in my life and in the life of the world, I go silent. So my first poem in America appeared only after, not less than in two years after we arrived. And this one is, it wasn't this poem. This one is a rendering. I rewrote it in English. Rewrote my original Russian poem, an old one, in English. It's called Before Dawn. And this is the first English piece that I wrote here. Before Dawn. A bird of glass, a bird with a scratched throat, a bird that tries to tell it all at once, a bird that turns its head when cold, a bird that's pinned with hopes, a bird, oh, whoa, a bird that must be turned up louder, a tiptoed bird, a bird that types, a bird that strikes the match. So these are all anonymous birds of the dawn. Outskirts, on the outskirts, this one was translated by Murrietta. The closer to the subway, the noisier and brighter. The puddles grow wider and shallower. The street lamps more pointless. Jupiter rotates swiftly and is hence ever changing. Saturn, on the other hand, is so light. Give it water, it flows. An attempt to explain, I just need to explain another something else, not the main question that is implied. There is in the prose piece that precedes this poem, there is a mention of a sunrise in my childhood, where in the pioneer camp, where the sun appears, resembles a projector, old cinema projector on those on the heavy carts on the lawn in the forest, in the clearing in the forest, and the sheet is bed sheet is stretched before two trunks of the trees. So this is the screen. An attempt to explain. At dawn, someone hangs the sky like a worn-out, wrinkled screen on the village's far end. The old projector rolls in from the east on its heavy cart. And I walk through the tall grass of Russian syllables, where colons and commas are abundant in June and syntax is vague on ladybug's wings. I would settle nowhere else, wouldn't settle for less. Trust me, nothing would ever suffice. But how do I explain how I dread the expression on my motherland's face? Believe it or not, it's an original English poem of mine, and it was written a long time ago. And now, of course, there is this sinister overtones to it. To Atlantis. Fleet left, towers are rising from waters and sink again. Grand Central of the sea. Its bottle glass of empty deep terminals and phoneless passages and shows of baby fish. Brave Herodotus had it described. It's just the illustrations that seem new. So to Poland, to all the native cities swallowed by forests, to all the folding books of hieroglyphs, to the clean design of Mayan steps, to steps beneath the altocumulus convoys, where my grandfather at 16 denounced the family, joined the Red Guard, saw terror, saw it all, sent them to hell, got himself jailed again, exiled, then owned. We haven't started it, but we've got to see how mermaids swim by rusty, snapped off doors of an express stuck in abyssal mud and sit on cliffs of rhymes and sing. As for the meter, as for the pure honey of rhythm, for iron of literal, for anarchist of depth, lighthouses of metaphors, drilled towers above shelved waters. We know that tar at night does look mysterious. From space that glides so low, oil spills look like an unknown alphabet. This short poem was translated by Murrietta. The previous one is the original English poem of mine. A barren wasteland lies mid one-eyed Sunday huts. Fierce Sunday sunset burns. The distant skies are dust. My resurrected voice. A caustic right of way. Crushed blazing glass between two smoking towns awakes, absorbs the tepid smoke. I'm very much interested in this idea of right of way, and I just noticed recently myself how many times I repeat this expression in this book and my other book, Journal. That to me, the right of way is not something that is related to trespassing, although I love to trespass, but it's about something in between, something that belongs to no place, a land of no one's land, and therefore everyone's land, or realm. In Absentia, I have this series, a cycle of poems, and this is just one of them. It's called In Absentia at Twilight. Today, I am Mrs., not Mr. Nabokov, standing here in the yard in my red faded boots and my stepson's oversized plaid shirt. I assembled the leaf blower myself, and I stand breaking apart last year's matted foliage, watching indifferently as the weighty top rotted layer lifts, and I steer those heavy tsunami one after another into the ravine by the shed. It's the time when dreams fill with my dead. Mountains block that's left of the sun. They darken toward evening, first one, then the second, the third. They linger, turning mauve, and move off to the west, like leaves to the ravine. And I'll read three more poems. I just don't know how I'm doing this time. We left in 1991. So after the episode in Sheremetyevo Airport, the last moments in the Soviet Union before we left, and actually 2 months after the Soviet Union was no more, as we know. And this is called The Border. There are a lot of borders in this book. So this is one of them. Is for my daughter Sasha. I wrote it in English, and it's addressed to Sasha, who was 5 when we left. I flew over Norway. I had lived in a cage, a landscape of frost-covered wires, and then broke free, flew away, saw fjords, lost here. Cliffs shone pure slate thereafter rain luster. When I flew over Norway, I was finally out, and you were 5. You slept on the woolen sleeve of my Moscow winter coat in the bliss of the atmosphere. Just think, I can walk, hear whispers, see hues, the way dry leaves fall, with a hollow sound of clapping hands into empty symphony hall. As my limbs, my eyelashes, and the lines of a poem are free to flow over me, not bound anymore by my eyelids, nor by the gates of that thirst for the border below. How it gleams in twilight, the rim of a forest lake, moraine rugged edge. And finally, one poem and one rendition, sort of. So the poem is titled Between a Willow and a Birch Tree. Here, it's a rather old poem of mine, about 15 years ago. It's for Chard in York. It was written in English. And while I was at the MFA program. And here we have 2 images of 2 languages as 2 trees. It's clear which one is willow, which one is a birch tree, just because of the grammatical allusions that are there. But now I think that I would, as I was preparing for this reading and I was just leafing through the book and I bumped into this poem, I thought that today I would rather think about the languages differently, certainly different matter, rather, the English and Russian, different maybe marble and, bronze, right? Marble for English, of course, very metamorphic and very solid and clear with those lines and majestic language, and bronze with this somewhat vague plasticity in shape. But here it's a tree and another tree. November wind sways you, bewildered, lost between 2 languages, one a birch tree and one a willow. And you, betrothed to one, betrayed the other. Stand barren, bitter, on the vast plain between 2 trunks, each outside your reach, not daring to touch the bark where blood drums under. In consonance, in vows, in veils of anvil clouds, long, wet, and heavy, trench coats covered in icy crust. You stand between your people and people not yours, between man and woman, not knowing who you are, where it will be. Birch or willow, bewitched by the weeping endings of one and of the other, translucent past tenses, so effortlessly peeling off. And the last piece I'm going to read, it's a strange. I need to say just a few words. There was this very famous Soviet song that was based on a very lyrics on a very Soviet Dagestan designated poet from Dagestan. You know that each republic was there was a poet designated, a scientist designated to each republic in the Soviet Union. This is how it worked. And there was this poet, not bad, Rasul Gamzatov, the son of the first poet in written Avar language, which is the language of Dagestan in the Caucasus Mountains. And he wrote, despite this being a very sort of a kind of a cliche, very common song that was sung, it was sung at various TV holiday concerts and so forth, because it's about the soldiers. It's an elegy to me, and I think that it's a very I think it's a terrific poem, in fact. And of course, we all knew it through the excellent Russian translation by Leedom and Caiozzo. So I wrote a variation on this song, and on this poem, and it's called A Song from Dagestan. Sometimes I think that soldiers who have never come back to us from the blood-covered plains escaped the ground and didn't cross the river, but turned instead into white, screeching plains. And since that time, the flock is flying narrow or wide or long, and maybe that is why so often, and with such a sudden sorrow, we stop abruptly, staring at the sky. On flies the wedge, trespassing every border, a sad formation, ranks of do, re, mi, and there is a gap in their open order. It is the space they have reserved for me. The day will come beneath an evening cloud. I'll fly, praying on my right, praying on my left, and in a voice like theirs, shrill and loud, call out to those on earth I've left. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina. I love your poetry, and you have such a deep sense of history, and your poetry is lyrical, and it's also very erudite and lovely. And that last piece just touched me very deeply. Where are you living right now?
I live, you know how they write on the back of books, lives between this and that, which is kind of, to me, it's a very funny expression, because I literally see a person living somewhere between. But I do live between New Jersey, northeastern New Jersey, and I also live in northeastern Pennsylvania. Not very far from each other, those places also.
When did you write your first poem?
I was, well, if I were to call it a poem, it's when I was 5. And, never stopped.
Well, Russia has such a deep history in poetry, and I know how valued the poet is in Russia, much more so than in America. I always love, I always think, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I always think that the 4 main important lyric poets in the early 20th century are Pasternak, Mandelstam, Anna Akhmatova, and Marina Tsvetaeva, if that's how you pronounce her name. Would you agree with that?
Well, to me, there are especially three of them of this. They call the four. The four, and three of the four were at different times have been, I would say, extremely important to me, especially Mandelstam and Pasternak. And as a teenager, Tsvetaeva, and Tsvetaeva's translations, by the way, Lorca to me Lorca was one of very important poets in my adolescent years, but as it often happens, you only have a handful of poems translated by someone who make it genuine poetry. So Lorca to me is also Tsvetaeva, because I think that the best translations were done by her. Just like Rilke's Pasternak's Rilke, rather. But yes, Mandelstam and Pasternak, I would say, were the two most important, and have been two most important influences, still are.
You know, I love the anthology, the Penguin anthology of Russian poetry that you were one of the co-editors or co-translators, maybe the co-editor too. And I noticed that the women poets in Russia have such depth and such emotion. And I really always love that. And I love that anthology. I love, Requiem by Anna Akhmatova. That's one of the great poems, I believe. And the courage that the women and the men have in face of whatever it is at that particular time in history. How old were you when you came to the United States?
I was 33.
53. Now, how do you do when you're going to write a poem? Do you write it in Russian? Do you write it in English? Or is it one or the other? Or is it both?
Well, right now I'm not writing poetry at all. Like I said at the beginning, when during some big important times of big events in my life or in the world, I tend to be silent rather in that respect. But in 2 years, I only wrote one poem, at least since the war began. And it was also a little bit even accidental. But there is no rhyme or reason. I mean, sometimes I write in English, sometimes I write in Russian. Of course, I consider myself a Russophone poet. When I write in English, it's like, dancing blindfolded, being blindfolded, because, of course, in the medium of the English language, I'm not that free person, free craftsman, if you will, as I am in Russian. But it's intriguing and it's exciting to write in English.
What is a day like for you in terms of your writing?
It's rather scattered. I'm a very slow reader. I'm a very slow writer. When I'm working on some project, which didn't happen to me until the pandemic year, actually, it was absolutely random. And there was this wonderful poet who was also a dissident, one of those who came out to the Red Square when Czechoslovakia was occupied by the Russian tanks, Natalia Garbanevskaya. John Baez has a song about her. So Natasha Garbanevskaya, who was a friend, she would say, I'm a tram poet. Tram, meaning, trolley tram. So like writing in, not at the desk as normal people would do. And I can relate to that. I am also inherently a tram poet. But lately, for the past 2 years, I've been very much taken with Elizabeth Bishop's poetry. And I'm slowly working on what I think will be a book, translation and renditions and essays thinking about her. And so now it's a little bit more structured, because when there is this kind of an inertia, there is this stream, you're in the flow, then it's a little bit more, I have a little bit more discipline, but I teach a lot. I was a high school mathematics teacher, as you mentioned, and science too, and taught at the universities a couple of years, for a couple of semesters, a couple of years. But then I became a free roaming tutor, which I'm now. So I'm kind of free and flexible in what way, but I still need to produce and earn a living. So I'm tutoring and I do it by tutoring various subjects to various people. And so what I have left.
You have quite a range and quite a mind and quite a scholarly accomplishments. What would you say the difference between being a poet in Russia and being a poet in America? I know Russia really values its poets, over time. Is there a distinction you see there, the way the Russians look and value their poetry, or not, or is it just a Western illusion?
I don't know. I mean, there is this famous quote from Nadezhda Mandelstam, who in turn quoted Osip Mandelstam. In her book, she wrote that Osip Mandelstam once said, "Oh no, actually, it was Nadezhda herself who said." That was her. That poetry is very important in Russia. People get killed for it. So, meaning poets. So that, on one hand, kind of establishes this very kind of grandiose image of a poet, which is not something I really relate to. First of all, I don't consider myself such a grandiose figure, and I tend to try to shy away from any kind of hierarchy or any kind of this pose of a poet, which I think is connected with this, with this view of a poet, of someone who is kind of channels God-given things. In Russia. And also Russia, what is Russia? Russia is changing every day, every hour. And in the Soviet Union, it was one thing. During the stagnation year, we were lived pretty much like, if you imagine a refrigerator, we were living in the freezer, right? So then it was different in the 90s. And so it's different. And I don't think that I'm in the position to say much about poetry in America, because even after all these years, I don't think that I know enough.
Well, we're glad you're here. In the introduction to that Penguin anthology, I think it was Chandler said that there's an ethical integrity in the poetry of the Russians that people value very highly. And it's a pleasure to have you on our show. You're introducing us to much more than I can even put into words, but it's just you're a wonderful writer, and we're very happy that you've been on our show, and thank you very much, Irina, and thank you very much, Sandra Giedeman, too. We're at the end of our show, and it's really been a wonderful reading. I would just like to take a minute and let our viewers know that next week we have a show, Poets Talk Movies, and we're going to have D.A. Powell, Paul Vangelisi, Richard Modiano, Elena Karina Byrne, and Beth Ruscio with us to talk about movies. And so that's our show today. And Jennifer Clymer is our director, and she's going to be here to take us home. And so once again, thank you very much.
I am so grateful for the time and for the artistry. It was a wonderful hour, just like I thought it would be. And thank you both. And Harry, as always, thank you for putting all of this together.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I believe, so today was Harry's 160th episode.
Wow. Congratulations.
Well, I look at it, thank you, Jennifer. I look at it as all of us here together being the co-creators. we're all here. Those of us in front of the camera, Irina, Sandra, me, Jennifer, and also all the people. There's quite a few people who work behind the camera, editing, production, sound, etc., camera. And so, the people who work behind the camera just give us such outstanding production values. And so the content and the production is just fabulous. So thank you once again, Irina Mashinski and Sandra Giedeman and Jennifer Clymer.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
And I look forward to next week, Poets talking about movies. If you missed it, Harry could have been caught on TCM this past weekend. They were showing Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
We watched it. We watched it. I love that movie. Love that
movie. Thank you so much, everybody.